Guess what, Lions? For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to exclusive bonus audio content and help this program grow by joining the Lions of Liberty Pride. To learn more, head over to lionsofliberty.com/support.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to Felony Friday right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Felony Friday, of course, is a weekly show where each and every single week I focus on exposing injustice in our nation's broken criminal justice system. And we might have some new listeners this week. We are running some ads on Part of the Problem with Dave Smith. And if this is your first time listening, this is only one of our shows. We also have a show every Monday hosted by Mark Clare. He interviews a lot of leading libertarian minds. He hosts roundtable discussions. Every Wednesday, we have Electric Liberty Land hosted by Brian McWilliams, your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty. We have the only libertarian variety show with 3 unique shows every single week. And today's show of Felony Friday is the 101st episode. So that means you'll be able to find the show notes at lionsofliberty.com/FF101. I'll link to everything we talk about, different articles. That's also where you can find the bio for my guest today, Dr. Cassandra Little. She has an incredible story to share. She faced a lot of injustice, a lot of difficult circumstances that she had to overcome at the hands of the federal government. Now, before I get to my interview today with Cassandra, I just want to tell you guys about Health Excellence Plus. Health Excellence Plus is an incredible free market alternative to your standard corporate health insurance. You can find out more about Health Excellence Plus at lionsofliberty.com/health. My guest today on Felony Friday is Dr. Cassandra Little. Dr. Little found herself the subject of an investigation by the IRS and Medical Fraud Unit, which this investigation began back in 2010. Ultimately, she was indicted in 2013 on 38 counts of healthcare fraud and money laundering. Cassandra was essentially legally forced to plead guilty to the original indictment for the 38 counts of fraud and money laundering, which totaled the amount of $82,000. In the end, the guilty plea resulted in a sentence of 33 months of incarceration in a federal prison camp, which began October 14th, 2013. On September 8th, 2015, Dr. Little was released to a halfway house in San Francisco. Cassandra, welcome to Felony Friday.
Oh, thank you so much, John. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for taking some time to share your story. And this interview, this show, is really all about giving people who have experienced the criminal justice system, who've experienced some injustice in the criminal justice system, to share their story. And normally a starting point that I like to start with for my audience's benefit, to get to know you a little bit better, is to start with sharing some background information. So I think a good place to start would be if you could share your background, where you grew up, where you went to school.
Sure. I actually grew up in East Palo Alto, California, which at the time had one of the highest murder per capita rates. And I think it's still up there. I was raised by my maternal and paternal grandparents. I used to go back and forth because both my parents, my mother was addicted to drugs and my father had his own challenges. So my sisters and I were raised by our grandparents, and I'm the oldest of 5 sisters, actually. So my childhood was filled with many challenges, and some that forced me to, grow up sooner than I needed to. So a lot of the times I spent, I went to school, and I went to high school. It was called Miller Atherton in California. I was bused. That was when busing started, which was kind of incredible for me. That's when I kind of pushed my love for basketball and sports of all kinds. And that's actually what kind of got me out of the hood, so to speak, was athletics.
How did athletics get you out of the hood?
I went to college on a basketball scholarship, and I started off at Cal State Fullerton, actually. So straight from the hood to Orange County, which was a culture shock. I was there for 2 years in 80. I left there in 84. I just was having a hard time academically, and I transferred to a smaller school called California Baptist. It's called California Baptist University now in Riverside, California, where I also had a basketball scholarship, and that's where I got my bachelor's.
That's very cool. I actually used to live in Riverside, California for a little over a year back in 2008. It's a nice area.
Yeah.
So what position did you play?
Point guard. I'm 5'4". I'm short. I was tenacious. I played point guard there. Graduated the next year. I was like the grad assistant because I needed an extra semester to graduate. And my coach there, who's still a very good friend, who actually visited me in prison, he afforded me the opportunity to be a grad assistant so I can graduate. I graduated from there, and I had a friend who was on my team. Her name is Laura Lewis, who was working at this place called Child Help USA. Because at the time, I thought I was going to be an attorney. Go figure. I really liked law. I had a lot of family members who were involved in the law on the other end of it. And so I went and I got my bachelor's in criminal justice. And so I needed some work. And she told me about this place called Child Help USA, which was in Beaumont, California. And that pretty much changed my life. It was a facility where it was like a huge orphanage where kids who didn't have parents, who were taken away from their parents, were housed and schooled. Everything was on the campus there. And I worked there for like 2.5 years.
So this experience you said it was called Child Help USA?
Yes.
What did that set you on your career path then from there?
Yes. Right from there, I knew. Number one, it was just natural. It was a natural place for me to be in regards to working with at-risk youth. It was familiar to me. I kind of identify my innate talent where people felt kind of fearful and didn't like to go to work. I loved it. I loved the kids. And that started me off. From there, I went from another friend that I play basketball with who lives here in Dayton, Nevada. She was like, "You should come to Nevada." I was like, "Okay, I'll try. Let me see if I can find a job." And from there, I found a job at a place called Children Behavioral Services, where I worked with the same thing, kids who had severely mental health issues and were in out-of-home placement. So I went there. I worked there for 2 years, and at the same time, I was like, I think I want to get my master's. I have this thing where I'm a lot of people say I'm an overachiever, and I am. I just think that there's no height to what you can do if you want to do it. And so I got my master's in social work. As I was getting my master's in social work, and traveling around and working with a lot of these kids and seeing in these facilities, I decided, I was like, you know what, I want to open my own program. And so that's what I did.
So how long after you got your master's in social work until you decided you wanted to open your own program? Was there? Well,
yes, it was about a 5-year in there because I wanted to get my clinical license, and that takes another 3 years after your master's. So I became a licensed clinical social worker, and at that point I was planning for it. I kind of knew the model I wanted to use. I wanted to use a humanistic model. I didn't want a lot of agencies use point systems. We kind of train kids to go into prisons, and I didn't want to use that. And so I had my model all set, and ready to go. And I ended up opening up my first home in 2002.
Okay, 2002. You said first home, so you opened multiple homes?
Yes. And 2002 was my first group, my first, call it therapeutic foster care home, because it's typically kids who are out of institutions or in hospitals or just hard to place, so to speak. And so, I opened up my first home, and I had started off with 2 kids. It was a sibling group. It was a brother and sister who were teens. And it just went crazy from there. That house was full within 2 weeks. I had 6 kids within 2 weeks. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, at that time I was like, okay, cause I have this thing where I never wanted to say no. Cause if I was called, I was like the last chance, So, I never wanted to say no. So at that point I was like, okay, I spoke with some of my family members, and that were, I was the only one in Reno at the time. I spoke with some of my family members and say, hey, you guys want to come and help me with this? Particularly my sisters. I had an aunt, and some friends, and we got together and developed kind of, formulated a bigger plan for my plan, and Ujima Youth Services took off from there.
So what is the process, just so for my own understanding, and I'm sure for the listeners' understanding, what is the process for someone to get placed in one of your homes? How is that facilitated? Is it government agencies reaching out to you?
Okay. Now this was pretty interesting. So from the time I opened from 2002 to 2006, most of my placements were from the state and the county. What happened in 2006, which kind of caused the big, which I say is not the main cause of what has happened to me, but is that the state of Nevada went to where they put the feds in charge of everything. So instead of having it where it was local, community based, where the kid, because Reno is not very big, it was the federal government is who we had to get approval for. To place a youth, which was kind of crazy and chaotic. So when it first started, I would get a call from a social worker. Typically, it's from the social services. All of the youth that were in my care initially were guardian. The Washoe County Social Services or the state of Nevada, and Nevada was their guardian. So those were my placements. In 2000.
So
go ahead, I'm sorry.
What was like did that present some challenges from going from the state placement model to the federal model? Like what was the biggest difference there?
Well, there were a lot of big difference, a lot of challenges. Because like I said, you're not knowing the kid. And when we went to Medicaid funding it, with the government funding it, they use a medical model. It's straight across. It has nothing to do with a child's needs. And the medical model states that at some point you're supposed to get better, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if a kid's in care, they're in the out-of-house placement. We have no control of if they get better or not, if they go home or not. So it's really like, and now they're finding that model just disrupted so many kids' lives and family lives. And so here in Nevada, I know they're making changes. They've gone back to the old model. Of where
what's the old model?
The old model is where they fund it. Okay. They fund it, and so you're not dealing with the government, because not only my agency wasn't the only agency that I in Nevada, Reno, Nevada. Because I was like one of the first, I had the most extreme consequences. But many after my agency, a lot of agencies started falling off.
So how did the funding work for all of this to run these houses?
Well, initially, it was you get paid. When I first started, I was a higher level home, so it'll go by rate. And higher level just meant that, you had some kids who were like either on medication, who had some, disruptive behaviors in school, couldn't be managed in a lower level home, like kind of a mom and pop home, So my group homes were what I call shift staff. They weren't mom and pops homes. So and so it could be like, okay, this child is having these many issues, so your rate could be $60 a day. And so that's how you were paid. Medicaid, when Medicaid came on, when the federal government came in 2006, they were like, okay, we're going to pay for the room and board at a lower rate, and then you have to bill separately for, their clinical needs, which caused a lot of problems because how do you define a clinical need? And so that was always an issue. That was always a challenge, and still is a challenge, to be honest, because some people are still using that model. And so you would bill, instead of just having one streamlined billing format, you would have maybe a menu of services you would have to bill for, which was crazy. And so I always stuck to, just because like I said, I'm pretty conservative and reluctant when the government got involved. Like I always tell people, I was a child, I was a welfare offspring. So I never wanted the government in my life, for a lot of reasons. And so, I always used just 3 services. I would not be, I underbilled a lot of times because it was just too convoluted.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like the amount of work to manage that from an administrative standpoint. Oh
my gosh. You become top heavy. When I first started, that's what I'm saying, you become really top heavy because you really had to have someone who would just do your billing. And that's what happened as time went on. Otherwise, you spend your whole time doing your billing and not really working on servicing or meeting the needs of the youth or the families that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. So the model itself is causing you to direct your energies away from what you're supposed to be doing and spending time on all of this administrative work.
Exactly. Because you have to be sure to drop, as I know now, dot your I's and cross your T's when you're dealing with the government. And so that was just, it was hectic. I mean, it's really hard to explain how hectic that period was, and still is for some people who are still dealing with that, and really want to provide a service to families and youth and communities. Like I told people, I've never got into this for money. You don't get into social work for money,
right?
But and so it just became just crazy. It just was a crazy process. And at the same time, trying to make sure you meet the needs of the youth, because by the time I closed, I had 64 youth in my program. 64.
Across how many different houses?
No, at the end, I had, when they closed me in 2010, I had 64 youth. I had 22 who were over the age of 18. So we call that a transitional, meaning that they were out of the county but still needed service. And then I had 40 who were under the age of 18 that were displaced. So it was pretty crazy. Crazy period, John. Crazy period.
It sure sounds like it. I mean,
oh yeah.
So at what point in time do you start getting investigated by the IRS?
Well, you never know when it starts, right? So, 2010, IRS and the Medicaid fraud unit walked through my business doors. Initially, they asked for my brother-in-law, who was my CFO at the time. And so, I'm like, what the heck? I'm not. And I've always been an open book. Every year we have an audit. We always perform a self-audit. We had a state audit. And so, I've always been transparent, which, I tell people, when you're dealing with the feds, be careful. Only give them what they ask for, because they'll find something that, you don't intend. So, I'm just like, well, I'm not worried, and so they came in 2010 is when it started. About 3 months later, well, I think it was like April 2nd, 2010, I received a letter from the Medicaid unit saying they were freezing my funds. And at this time, like I said, I have 64 youth. in my care. I'm like, okay. I didn't know what to do, and no one else in this community had been through that, so they didn't. Everybody just kind of was like lost, and so, I'm rushing around because I'm a fixer. I'm like, okay, I need to fix this, and so I try to, contact Medicaid, and they're like, oh, we can't talk to you, and so then I was like, okay. I probably need to look at, meeting with the county and the state to see what's happening, because I have all these kids, and I had about 70 staff. I was a big program. You can't, you can't just freeze funds, but they can, and they did. And so, I met with the county and the state, and they were like, yeah, we've been contacted. We're going to, we think you need to make plans to move the kids. And I'm like, what? I'm still like in shock. Like I said, I'm a fighter. I've been a fighter my whole life. And I'm like, I'm not going to, some of my kids I've had for the whole entirety, I'm not going to, I was like, I'm just not going to give the kids up, like that. This is their home, and so they were like, nope. So next thing I know, I received another letter from the county, the state, and then from Medicaid. It wasn't just that we're freezing your funds, that your contract is terminated as of May 20th. And all kids had to be removed from our program. And that's when I kind of just went black. I was numb for forever.
So I'm assuming it was around that point in time when you realized that you could be in some serious trouble with the federal government here if they're freezing your funds and they're shutting you down.
Exactly. And still, I didn't hear nothing. I really didn't have anything concrete. And, I know I've been in this town a long time, been a professional in this town, been involved in a lot of boards and so much. So I know a lot of people, and I was like, so people were calling me here. They were hearing things, the IRS is really trying to push for an indictment. And I'm like, based on what? I'm just trying to grasp. Because when you don't know what you're fighting, you don't know what direction to go. You didn't know. So like I said, this started in 2010. My program was closed May 2010. I didn't get indicted to 2013. I had 3 years of this uncertainty. I wouldn't do anything. For the first year, I didn't leave my house. I just felt like I was being watched. And I was. They have pictures of my house, which is very conservative. I mean, I just was not the person they wanted me to be. I didn't have like a big mansion on the golf course. I lived by my group homes, by my kids, in the neighborhood they lived in. I didn't have no fancy car. I had like a Dodge. I didn't take no big, huge trips. So they couldn't create that narrative. And so for 3 years, I kind of dealt with the uncertainty of what was going on. And I just sat here and waited.
What was it like when the indictment came down?
Well, when the indictment came down, to be honest, I was angry. I received the indictment, and actually the IRS agent, because at this time I'm becoming, familiar with the agent. Just like he's investigating me, I'm investigating him. He was young. It was his first 2 years. His name is Landon Tishner. I don't care about saying his name. He said mine all over this town forever. And I know that he was in that office just pushing for it for the past over the 3 years, and so he actually came with the young Medicaid fraud unit guy, I forgot his name, and served me my indictment in my hand, which, in hindsight, I'm like, like I said, I'm very, very courteous. I'm like, and I knew it was coming. Because what happened was, okay, here's the switch. I had my major program, which had my 64 youth, which was called Ujima Youth Services. In 2000 and, what was it? About 2010, no, 2007, I had started a small program with a friend of mine who had MR clients that were developmentally disabled, and they were coming of age and didn't have anywhere to go. And so nobody would take them, and they couldn't live completely on their own. So we had started a smaller program called Heal Little. And she was older church lady. Okay. So, and this program only had about 20 kids in it, and it had been going, like I said, 3 years, about 3.5 years. And so, I pretty much just kind of helped develop that program. We had staff that did all the services and so forth. And she handled all the financial stuff on that end, on that program. And so when my indictment came, here's the irony. It had nothing to do with Ujima Youth Services, which was my major program. I mean, which, I had forever and had probably the biggest, it is the biggest program. It was on Hill Little. And so I was baffled, to be honest. I was like, okay, because when they had came to my office and raided my office, they took all of my Hill Little my Ujima Youth Services information. But I just think it was too much paperwork, and it was ironclad. It was too hard for them to prove anything with that over the 3 years. So they switched to Hill Little. And what they found with Hill Little in my indictment was, like I said, my original indictment, which I pled guilty to, was for $84,000. And there was checks that were written out that were written to like guardians, mm-hmm. to provide services for their kids. And the Medicaid, what they said to me was within the Medicaid Chapter 400, which is the manual, I've read it a million times, which is the thickest book ever. There's like 8 words, one line that says guardians cannot be reimbursed for services of their kids, and that's what they indicted me on. And so that's what the $84,000 was my initial indictment.
So they can't be reimbursed for services, but could they? Like, how else would they pay for services?
Well, no, they can't. What happened was that the Hill Little, that program is that we created, was a program so that the kids would stay in the home. So instead of pulling a kid and putting them in my program, or hiring another staff to go provide the mm-hmm. services, what we did is we brought the parents in and we trained them. Okay, so one of the parents had to be home at all times. And we trained them to provide the services. They learned about the meds, everything that my staff went through for training, they went through. And so they were 1099, they were paid as contracted staff. So Medicaid and and it's in there, it's written, so I can't complain about that. The Chapter 400 says that a guardian cannot be reimbursed for, and that's the line out of this big manual that they indicted me for with that Hill Little, not my major program, which was Ujima Youth Services. They did it off of Hill Little after 3 years of searching.
I wonder what is their thought process as to why they wouldn't want you, paying the guardians if you're bringing them in and training them to care for their own children.
Well, what they're stating, well, there's 2 things. What they're stating is that the billing, which if for Hill Little, I didn't even do the billing, but that's neither here nor there. The billing states that I'm supposed to provide the service, which that's not how it's read, but that's what Medicaid said. That's what they testified to. That's not how I read it. I could hire staff. I could hire clinical staff, at least I thought, to provide mm-hmm. the service. But so they were saying, no, that's what you're supposed to do. So they're saying that all those for the $84,000, the way they did the indictment was every time a check was written to reimburse the parent, they called that fraud.
They called that fraud.
Okay.
And that's all.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
And like if we wrote a check for, sometime we were like reimbursed for school fees. And when people, like I said, it's so easy they can create, they're very creative. And so, because I keep all this, because, people have a tendency of not believing me, I have it all written, is that it could be a $200 check and then it's fraud because it went through the bank. Well, like I said, I typically did not handle the financial. One time my business partner was gone and I wrote like 4 checks, I think. So they used those 4 checks to to tie me into it, also in regards to the money laundering.
I know many of you are facing major decisions with your healthcare right now, and I want to make sure that you know about an amazing alternative to your standard corporatized health insurance known as Health Excellence Plus. Health Excellence Plus is an incredible program that helps you keep medical costs under control by taking charge of your own healthcare and not leaving all the decisions about what doctors you see and what procedures you need or don't need up to some corporate bureaucrat. Along with providing 24/7 access to medical professionals, tax-deferred health savings accounts, and preventative care, Health Excellence Plus empowers you to finally take control of your healthcare. To learn more, head on over to lionsofliberty.com/health or call the special hotline for Lions of Liberty listeners at 855-290-4447. Be sure to mention Lions of Liberty.
So your business partner was indicted as well?
Yes. So, and she, like I said, the elderly, the nicest lady in the world. I mean, just purest heart. And so, yeah, she's like 70 something. And so they indicted her as well. So, you know, when the indictment came, that was the beginning of the game. Because, you know, I'm looking at it, and like I said, I'm relatively smart. I know I'm not going to win. I know they have a 98 point some percentage of winning. So I'm like, you know what? I got a public defender, and she was like, you know, Dr. Little, I'm going to tell you right now, this is not about the truth. So it's about, you know, what they can prove. And so I'm like, well, here, all I can tell is my truth. I don't know what else to do. I don't know any other way to operate. And so they came back and they offered me a plea for less time, but I had to agree to a $1 million, which meant that they're saying the whole entirety of the program for 3 years is ill-gotten funds. And I refused that. I was, I'm like, I'm not agreeing to that, and at this time, you know, my business partner had got herself an attorney. And I had, like I said, I had a public defender who was most helpful, to be honest. In this case, I was like, I'm not agreeing to that. So then he came back to another one, the prosecutor, and he said, this is the last one I'm going to offer. And it was for $800,000. I was like, I'm not agreeing to that. I did not steal $800,000. Now, I was raised by grandparents. If I did something, I'm the first person to agree, hey, I did something. I was like, I'm not agreeing to that $800,000. I talked to my family. I was a single parent. My partner at the time just couldn't handle it. She left. So I had my son, and I was like, hey, you guys may have to take care of him, but they're gonna have to take it out my behind. I am not agreeing to that. I stole this money for a lot of reasons. Number one, I didn't want to have to be beholden to that for the rest of my life. And so I refused the plea deal, but my business partner accepted it. And so they offered her less time to testify. People say against me, but once they get it's us against them. I have no ill feelings against her at all. Because one of us was going to do more no matter what. That's why they like 2 or 3 or more people. I know that I know it's a game. So to be honest, I told her, say whatever you need to say. I thought really that they would let her off, but she ended up getting time also. But so she agreed to it. And at my discovery, they had her testify my discovery was like 2.5 hours. It took forever. Testify to the fact that, oh yeah, we planned and schemed to steal. I think at that time it was like they lowered hers to like $600,000 or something. By then her plea deal had been lower, and so but I still refused. So then that they say that's not accepting responsibility. So they try to take 2 points from me for that.
What do you mean take 2 points?
Well, with the federal guidelines, there's points. If you accept responsibility, you get It's a point. It's all a numbers game. That's why I didn't really want to accept the money amount, because that once you get to a certain amount of money, it correlates with the amount of time they can give you. They can recommend, and so the points the points put you in another bracket of time being served or time served, because and so they tried to say I didn't accept responsibility, but when it came down to sentencing, the judge didn't accept that part. So they were recommending 60 months, and I got 33.
So the prosecutor's recommending 60 months, and the judge pretty much cut it in half.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your time in prison. And you started writing your blog like 30 days or something before you went in, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
Your blog is, I just want to say to the listeners real quick, the blog is it's the Felonious PhD, right?
Yes.
What's that, a felony? I'll link to it on the show notes page. It's the feloniousphd.wordpress.com. And just tell us a little bit about the motivation and why you decided to do that.
Well, like I said, one of the things is I'm a researcher, and I was fortunate enough. I had the opportunity to kind of plan my time to go into prison. I couldn't find anything. Everything was male oriented. I couldn't find any information, and I really wanted to. Being a clinician, like I said, I have been through a lot, but that was the closest I've ever been to killing myself, and that's honest. And because I felt alone and isolated, and so I was like, you know what? I don't want any other woman to ever feel this way, especially a mother. No one can understand the impact that has on a mother. And like I was a professional mother, so I took my parenting seriously, And so I was like, I'm just going to write about this. And I was a relatively private person. I was like, I'm just going to put it all out there from the beginning of how this process, because the process prior is the most emotionally traumatic part you can ever go through. Because if you're not familiar with the system, like I have family members who are telling me, oh, you're going to be all right. You're going to be okay. It's the Fed. You're just going to the camp. But for me, number one, I'm very prideful. I worked hard not to be in that situation. And here I was. It really plays on your psyche. And so my motivation was to let people know that we're going to be impacted by this system, particularly women, that you are not alone. And yes, it hurts, but you can get through it. And I wanted to and it gave me a way to kind of verbalize some of my angst, because when you see the words USA versus Cassandra Little, it's like unsurmountable. It's like it's like they're talking about Goliath, and so it kind of gave me a voice. So that was my reasoning for doing the blog, and I started and I did a countdown, and because I had like I said, 64 kids at the time of closing, but I have had over 200 kids in my program. So I had a lot of people who this has impacted. And I had 70 staff people who were unemployed, and my family members. So it kind of impacted my whole community and anybody who was tethered to me. And so I wanted to be able to tell people what was going on without having to really be face to face with people all the time. And while I was going into camp, I wanted to let them know that I was okay.
And so you were able to continue writing while you were in camp, right?
Yes. I have a friend who I would write and send information to her, and she would post it. I was very careful because I know the process. I only wrote about how I was feeling. The other stuff I wrote and I sent, and I have her held for me. I have like 4 binders of blogs here. That I'm actually writing a book. I'm working with a writing coach on putting that together. And so I was very careful on what I put out in the blogs. It was mainly, emotional stuff. And I would try to put stuff so if people were coming in, they would know like, hey, go renew your driver's license before you come. Wire yourself some money before you come, because you won't have no access. So I was trying to give some skills that people can bring in, they can do prior to surrendering or coming into the camp.
Yep. Previous guest on this podcast, Holly Kuhlman, she blogged during her time in prison, and ultimately it really ended up getting her thrown in solitary confinement for telling honestly what happened during a prison riot, and talking about other ways that she was mistreated. Even writing and doing it within confinements, that is a risk, but I think that's a risk. Obviously, you were willing to take to let everybody know, and you probably have more people than normal because of your background and all these kids that you've helped who were interested in your well-being and wanted to follow along. So, that was. I'm sure there were a lot of people that were reading that and were thankful that you kept them updated. So, I wanted to ask you your time in prison. If you had to describe it in a sentence or two sentences, what was that time like for you?
Oh my gosh. It was an empty space. Like I was honestly baffled that we have this kind of process in our country today, and that's not being extreme. Like I said, I was able to view things from a very, educational and clinical perspective, and it got to where it was not even about my story anymore, about what our system does to some of the women who have been in 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, just sitting there. It was very disheartening. I tell people I'll never view my country the same again.
I'm not going to ask you to use any names, but can you provide an example of one of the women who was in there serving for 10 years, some of what they were going through?
Well, I have like one friend, her name is Darian Edson. She's in there. She just filed an appeal. Actually, I just went and heard her oral argument. She received, I think, almost 10.5 years for what they call it conspiracy, but it was mainly because she didn't take a plea deal in regards to her boyfriend's case, and she lost, and never been in trouble. She's an attorney, actually. It was like the highest amount of time giving in Sacramento, the state of California, for a bankruptcy fraud case, which wasn't her bankruptcy. It was her boyfriend's bankruptcy fraud case. But she sat in on a meeting that was set up by the feds. And so she was implicated, and they wanted her, like I said, they like two people because it makes their case easier. And so she ended up fighting it. They had offered her like 6 months and a misdemeanor, but you just feel like, oh, this is no way, this is not going to happen. And she lost and got 10 years.
God,
crazy,
unbelievable.
Crazy. And so it got to where you started hearing those stories. Like I said, I've had the best of a worst situation. There was another lady in there, Bernice Brown. She's from Detroit, and similar. Hers is Medicaid fraud. She had a home health program, and I think they gave her like 12 years. Same kind of case like mine. And I was, you just hear it over. A nurse in there. You just hear those stories over and over again. And I'm not saying that there should not be consequences. Even in my case, I'm saying, okay, look, it's just the extremity and to the extent that the government will go to create a narrative about you that just does not represent who you are and what you do and what has happened. Is the hard part for me.
Be one thing. When you talk about fraud, I mean, when you talk about someone's defrauded, something's being stolen. I mean, something, property or money. So in a situation like what you went through, nothing was stolen directly from a victim, and if it was to that extent, I mean, the only remediation should be having to repay that money. So yeah, locking someone in prison, I don't see how that would do anything to remedy the situation. But that's the world we live in today, and
yes,
and as you know, I'm sure the prisons are not set up to reform people, to help people once they do reintegrate back into society to be successful. It's the exact opposite.
No, like I said, I was fortunate. I had a plan going in, and I knew what I was going to focus on. I was going to focus on myself for once, and a lot of the women in there, there's, the biggest program they have in there is GED. Well, a percentage of the women that was, I taught in the education department, so that was a major deal. But you have someone like myself, and you have like Darian, you sitting there for 10 point something years. What is she going to do with herself? There's no clinical help. There's no medical help. I'm telling you, I wrote a blog that was called Wheelchairs, Canes, and Orthopedic Shoes. There are so many old women just in there sitting, crocheting. I am not kidding you. It's appalling.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, because those women in there, on top of the fact that their lives have been completely thrown off track. Think about their families. I mean, these have ripple effects, and it's very troubling. So, based on the experience that you went through, if someone listening to this was either in the middle of, or maybe they're either about to go into prison, or they're in the part where the waiting game, like you went through for several years before, for 2 or 3 years before getting indicted, what sort of advice would you have for them?
I would say, first of all, it's get involved in some counseling, because it's very traumatic. And if you have kids or family members that you're closely tethered to, have them part of that process. And if you do have the opportunity to walk in, like I said, I was fortunate. I walked into, to prison. Make sure that you've already have your doctor's appointments done, because you will not get very good medical help. Just try to have as many of your affairs in order as possible, because you will not be able to do anything. You're very isolated from the world. Once you're in there, you won't be able to get anything done. If you have a business you need to put in order, get it in order. Like with my son, I signed a temporary custody paperwork, so my family would have an easy time, with school and any medical. So you want to put all that stuff in order to alleviate any of that stress. Because once you're in there, just listening to the women that were in there, a lot of their stress were stemming from wanting to make sure everybody was okay on the outside.
Did you hire or did you work with a prison consultant of any type before you went in?
No, I didn't. I worked with, like I said, I have a close friend who's a therapist. Well, she was an intern at the time I worked with. Did a lot of stuff with her. Read a lot of books. I just kind of got my mind right. I just went into it game time, like I was, I was like, once I decided, I'm not going to kill myself, I'm going to live. Then I just did 100% of this, what I need to do to keep myself going emotionally, and kept my sense of humor. You got to keep your sense of humor in there, because the people, their whole goal is to try to break you. And to remind you that you're an inmate. I was inmate 47078-048, and they love saying that, but I don't own it. That's their number, and so you really got to make sure you go in with a strong mind. I've seen a lot of capable women end up in what we call the pill line, getting psychotropic medications for depression, and they couldn't sleep. And so, I would say, prepare yourself mentally, and that you can do it. Just make it the challenge of your life. And once you get in there, you're like, what in the heck is this? It's nothing that you could ever think of in your whole life experiencing. So.
Yeah, well, that's some great advice, and I want to thank you for coming on this show, Cassandra. I want to thank you for sharing your story. You know, hopefully, with this being out here now, this will reach other people and help other people who are dealing with similar situations. I want to give you the opportunity now to plug or talk about anything that you're working on, or give any parting words that you'd like to share with my audience.
Sure, I'm. Like you said, you already told about my blog space. I'm going to be having another. I stopped blogging on that for a year. I'm starting next year on a blog spot called The Happy Place. It's called Pain to Purpose. And so that's going to be starting hopefully by mid-January. I'm also going to have a blog talk station called The Happy Place. And I'm working on a book called The Happy Place, Pain to Purpose. And I do a lot of speaking and conferences. I'm doing some guest lecture at the university here. One of my friends, when this started happening to me, she's a professor and she started a class on mass incarceration. So I guest lecture with her because I can't get the university to hire me because I'm a felon now. So just keep going from resilient to brilliant. That's my motto. I just won't accept anything less of myself.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Cassandra.
Well, thank you for having me, John. And thanks for all you're doing. This is wonderful.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview today with Cassandra Little. There's something that now that I've passed 100 episodes, and I feel like, looking back on these episodes, looking back on a lot of the interviews I've had with people like Cassandra, people who have suffered injustice, people who have spent time incarcerated behind bars and really fought through a struggle. And I want to do my best now going forward when I have someone on like Cassandra that has been through the struggle. I don't want to say a lot in the conclusion. So I'm just going to let this interview really stand on its own. In the future interviews like this, there might be times where, I have to add something or clarify something or give my view on some aspect of it. But for the purposes of this interview, my perspective, I don't think there's really much I should add. So I'm just going to say, if you guys enjoyed this, please consider supporting the Lions of Liberty podcast. We can't continue to grow and continue to reach out and advertise in other podcasts to try to grow our audience. And we can't continue really to have this show in this format unless we have your support. And we've had some fantastic support from our Pride members. We have a growing group, Lions of Liberty Pride, members at the $25 monthly level, the $10 monthly level, the $5 monthly level. Of course, at the $25 level, you get a lot of free goodies. You get a monthly conference call with us, and of course, you get all the exclusive content. At $10, you don't get the conference call, but you still get some free goodies, and you still get the content. At $5, of course, you get the exclusive content, and that's what you get. So, and it is a lot of exclusive content. We produce normally more bonus content than we do our daily 3 shows. And we have some standard programs that we have going right now. We have our Conspiracy Theory Roundtable, which is once or twice a month. We have our Degenerate Gamblers Roundtable, which is every week. There's interviews that are released early. For example, if you were in the Pride, Mark Claire is going to be publishing an interview coming up with Ron Paul. Our Pride members have already heard that interview, an early release of the Ron Paul interview. So it's a great way to support the show and also get more content and get content before everyone else does. So it's a win-win, right? Everybody wins. You win, we win, Liberty wins. Why not? Join the Pride. So other than that, guys, subscribe to the show. If you haven't subscribed, why not? Of course, any rating and comments you can leave us on iTunes or Stitcher or any of those places help us out tremendously. And if you haven't joined the Lions of Liberty Forum, that's where it's all happening, man. That's what it's all about this last week. And the Lions of Liberty Forum has been freaking crazy with the Liberty Draft back and forth debate. And I'm recording this before The results are final, actually, on Wednesday night, and things are getting pretty crazy. So it's back and forth. There's been 3 different teams in the lead, and there's been a lot of smack talked back and forth. But it's all in good fun, and I think we're all starting to learn some of the perils of democracy. But you know what? The way I look at it, it's good as libertarians to learn how to win in this democratic process, because we're going to have to win here this way in order to advance the ideas of liberty. So come to the Lions of Liberty Forum. Just go to Facebook, punch Lions of Liberty Forum in the search bar at the top, and join. It's free. We'll see you there. That's all I got for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.